Before we begin, I have a quick request. If you love spine-chilling stories, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. This helps us continue bringing you more incredible stories. And when you're done, tell me in the comments, which of these stories affected you the most?
Working in a hospital is already terrifying in itself. Cold hallways, flickering lights, the silence of the night broken only by the distant sound of heart monitors. For many nurses, the job goes beyond patient care. Some have witnessed things that defy any logical explanation. Apparitions, whispers, invisible presences. Some of these experiences are so terrifying that the witnesses themselves hesitate to share them. Today, you will hear 4 real stories from nurses who face the inexplicable. If you think hospitals are just places of healing, you might change your mind after this video. If you enjoy terrifying stories, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because what's coming next is not for the faint-hearted. I've been a nurse for over 10 years, and I was always skeptical. Until that night. It was a quiet shift, one of those rare moments when the hospital wasn't packed. I was on the 3rd floor, where patients in palliative care are placed. It's always a heavy place, where people are there to spend their final days. At one point, while I was organizing the patient records, I saw from the corner of my eye an elderly woman with white hair, wearing a hospital gown, walking down the hallway. I found it strange because at that time, no one should have been up. I quickly got up and followed her. When I turned the corner, I saw the woman entering room 305. I hurried and entered right behind her, but the room was empty, the bed made, the lights off. But I was absolutely sure I saw her go in. I returned to the nurse station, still trying to figure out what happened. I decided to check the records for patients who had been in that room. That's when I felt a chill run down my spine. The last patient who occupied room 305 was an elderly woman named Donna Amelia. She had passed away 2 nights ago. That night, I was never the same. I was a newly graduated nurse working the night shift. I always knew that hospitals had their share of strange events, but I never expected to experience something like this. It was around 3 a.m. when a patient named Mr. Roberto began having complications. He had been admitted with a severe infection, but until that moment, he seemed stable. We rushed to his room, did everything we could to stabilize him, but unfortunately, he passed away. We filled out the paperwork, called his family, and the body was taken to the morgue. I was emotionally exhausted, so I went to the bathroom to collect myself. When I came out, something made me freeze. At the end of the hallway, standing and staring directly at me, was Mr. Roberto, the same patient we had declared dead minutes before. I blinked, trying to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But he was there. Only something was off. His face seemed empty, expressionless. He just stared at me, motionless. I felt my breath catch. I closed my eyes for a second, and when I opened them, he was gone. I went straight to the morgue. His body was still there, covered by a white sheet. That night, I learned that not all patients leave the hospital. I worked in the maternity ward and always loved my job. But there's one thing about hospitals no one tells you. There are stories that circulate through the hallways, whispered among the staff, stories that few dare to question. One night, I was organizing some documents when I heard a baby crying at the end of the hallway. It was a clear, loud, desperate sound. I went over, thinking maybe a mother was trying to calm her newborn. But the rooms were empty. There were no babies in the ward that night. The crying continued. It seemed to be coming from room 217, which had been closed and vacant for months. A chill ran down my spine. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The room was dark, the curtains swaying lightly. The crying stopped immediately. That same night, I asked an older nurse about it. She looked at me seriously and said, You heard it too? Years ago, a mother lost her baby in that room. Since then, some of us still hear it crying. I never walked down that hallway alone again. I was at the end of a 12-hour shift, exhausted, waiting for the clock to hit 7 a.m. so I could leave. Since the hospital was quiet, I took a moment to rest and leaned back on the sofa in the break room. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, but didn't quite sleep. That's when I felt something touch my shoulder. I immediately opened my eyes, thinking it was one of my coworkers, but the room was empty. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just exhaustion. But then I felt it again, a cold hand pressing on my shoulder. This time, a shiver ran up my spine. My heart started to race. I jumped up and left the room. When I told my supervisor what had happened, she just sighed and said, "I've heard this before. There's something here that likes to remind us that we're not alone." After that day, I never could rest during a night shift again. These are just a few of the dark stories that nurses around the world experience. Hospitals are places of life and death, and maybe some souls simply refuse to leave. Have you ever heard a similar story? Or do you know someone who works in healthcare and has gone through something inexplicable? Leave your comment below. We want to hear your story. If you liked this video, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell to not miss the next terrifying stories. Good night, and be careful the next time you enter a hospital. You never know who is alive or dead.